Hello there and welcome to Company of Heroes 1 versus Company of Heroes 2. This direct comparison video is an opinion piece. It's my opinion, but it's all very well educated opinions. I'm a big fan of both games. I've been a big fan of Company of Heroes 1 for a very long time. It's my favourite game of all time, and Company of Heroes 2 is a damn good sequel. But we've had to wait 4 years for it to be a damn good sequel, so this video is only really viable now, and we're able to now sit back and think which game offered more in which area, and we can able to have an objective look as much as we can do, and hopefully a video such as this will fuel some good feedback in the comments sections. I know Relic themselves have been interested in this topic of conversation on their forum, so I want to throw my hat into the ring and have a look at it myself. So we're going to be going through these. I'm going to be giving them a score of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. There are 20 aspects, so it'll be a score out of 100 for each game. And I think we should get it on, and we're going to start with the UI. We've got similar situations here. We're playing on Angerville as the Soviets in this case, and we're going to be talking about the UI. We're going to start on the bottom left and work our way to the top right. The bottom left of the screen is, of course, occupied by the tactical map, and in my opinion, Company of Heroes 1 tactical map is a little bit more obvious, a little bit more distinct, and the contrasts work a little better to the human eye when you glance over them, especially when you look at the UI overall here. So the UI stands for the user interface. I do count the mechanics of it. We'll talk about mechanics later on. This is all about the aesthetics, and the aesthetics of the UI for Company of Heroes 2 is that it doesn't quite look as good as Company of Heroes 1 for the TAC map primarily. The TAC map for Company of Heroes 1 just stands out better. It looks like a military map. The buildings look better. In Company of Heroes 2, you'll notice the buildings are just black squares. It just doesn't look as good. It looks a bit muddled, like it was never designed as well from the get-go, and everything since has been a little bit in addition. So let's talk about a good thing for Company of Heroes 2. There are several about the UI, and in fact, most of the rest of this portion is going to be in favour of Company of Heroes 2, you'll be surprised to know. There is dead space in both games. There's dead space here for Company of Heroes 2, and dead space here underneath my drag box there for Company of Heroes 1. It just says Company of Heroes. And that is, we never want to see that. Dead space is bad space because it's not utilised, and it could have been game space. You could have seen more of the game that way, and you can't, so that's not cool. One good thing about Company of Heroes 2 is, you see that this box here in Company of Heroes 1, the resource section, that is good because it's horizontal and vertical space, so your eye can cast over it at a glance in a tense situation. Company of Heroes 2 does it better. It may be a horizontal strip. However, if you want to build loads of penal battalions now, you now see you can't build the third one because you don't have enough resources. Why not? Costs 300, you only have 280 manpower right now because the numbers are right next to one another. CoH1, you have to look there, then look to the left, then make a calculation. It doesn't tell you if you can afford. Same with grenade abilities. If you didn't have enough munitions for a grenade, it wouldn't tell you. It would just say, and you'd have to click, and then you'd have to think. No, it's just not good UI. It was a big improvement in CoH2. Well done for that one. Another good aspect, of course, is the unit icons in the top right in CoH2. These were revolutionary. You can see what's happening with your army at any one point. You can see if you're in combat. You can see if one's retreating. It's great. The cover icons are better in CoH2. They're all more obvious. You can see where they're going to go a little bit better. CoH1 didn't quite point out this feature as well as it could have done. The unit icons are a bit kind of sporadic. Also, they don't actually go in cover as well, but that's a mechanic. That's not necessarily the UI. But it's all about that kind of interaction and with the actual game itself. And I think CoH2 does do it better overall. So I'm ready to give my first score. I think both games do it well. CoH2 does it a slightly bit better in that one regard. There we go. We'll give the scores out for that. Graphics, you can see, is going to be another win for CoH2. Although CoH1's graphics do hold up over time, and we have to consider when the games came out. So, Company of Heroes 2, the graphics are fantastic. It's one of my favourite games to play for this reason. You know, it looks beautiful. Great fidelity for an RTS game. Really high quality. Company of Heroes 1 has aged slightly, however, not much relative to the year it came out, you know. We're not looking at big changes here. We're looking at tiny, tiny changes overall relative to the year it came out. And I really don't think you can say that CoH2 is 7 years better than Company Heroes 1. So it's 2006 to 2013. It's better, but it ain't that. It's not astonishingly better. It's just better. So again, with regards to graphics, I do think it was a marked improvement for CoH2, but I don't think you can really mark CoH1 down about it. So that's pretty much neutral. We'll just give that a neutral one. Company Heroes voice acting is phenomenal across the board for both games. Both games do it really well. You can hear a bit of the rifleman behind you. But if you want to give it a test, if you wanted to go on any forum to do with voice acting or any YouTube post which collects the best voice lines from Company Heroes series, Company Heroes 1 does have more memorable lines such as "We're Jagdpanzer, goddammit, and we hate you," etc. It's very campy, it's very characterful in Company Heroes 1. Company Heroes 2 has less character, less camp, and in my opinion is less memorable as a result. So I would give the win to Company Heroes 1 because of this. You don't want overly camp and overly cheesiness, but you do want it to be memorable, and I do not think Company Heroes 2 is as good. The Brits are great, they do redeem it, and that's why it's not 4-2, it's only 4-3, because the Brits do regain the balance for Company Heroes 2 in that regard. Mechanics, let's get back to the game. So the mechanics, there is no vaulting in Company Heroes 1, that is a feature that is lacking. It was introduced in Company Heroes 2. But the mechanics of the tap map aren't as good. I'm trying to retreat here, I can't. If this was CoH2, I would be able to. You can do anything pretty much in retreat. You can reverse in retreat. That's that there. I'm reversing whilst in retreat. That mechanic isn't even possible in Company Heroes 1. There is no reverse. You have to select behind the vehicle. If you select too far behind, he will turn around, so you don't want to do that. You have to keep dragging. A lot of shift commands are good for this kind of thing. And that's not helpful. And there you go, the shift commands didn't work. I must have messed up a little bit, or it forgot one of them. So, the mechanics did improve in CoH2. They are better overall, and there are a lot of distinct advantages, and I think that goes without saying. So again, I think obviously you have to consider when the games came out. You can't mark down CoH1 for it too much, but CoH2 did make improvements. Capping, right, so there's a big design decision here, so this is a direct comparison. This isn't about the age of the games anymore. So Company Heroes 1, how does the capping work? Not including bugs like, of course, cap walking, etc. Capping works by, you go to a flag, we'll wait for it to happen. Oh, we've got to win a battle here, so I don't think we'll be able to win that. Against two MP40 squads. In CoH2, you may be familiar with it. You go to the circle in question, and you stand within it. It's a very familiar concept from kind of FPS gaming. It's zonal, and it creates firefights. In CoH1, you have to win the firefight before you can cap. Capping isn't as big of a feature, and when you're capping here, one of your men goes to the capping flag, crouches, and he's the guy raising the flag. There is no, he's not doing anything, he's just crouching. The other guys are redundant, so you cannot cap whilst in combat. And that has created many great situations in CoH2 where, a unit jumps within this circle, stops the cap at the last second, then it's a fight to the death. And if he was to move out of the circle, the game would be won. If he doesn't, he needs to win at this moment. It's fantastic. It creates so many dynamic situations. Also, the same situation of the trade-off is there, because there's never really cover in a capping circle. So if you want cover, you have to stand outside it. If you want a cap, most of the time you have to be within it. And I think that's just a great feature overall. I think it's a massive improvement in Company Heroes 2. And a distinct design decision that worked better. So that is when the big scores come out. So I don't think CoH1 was bad, but relative to CoH2, I think CoH2 made a big improvement in that regard. And I think that's a big win. Resource system, though. This is something that I believe is in Company Heroes 1's favour. Go to the resource system and go over to the tap map, the best way to display it. You'll notice that there are something called standard territory points in Company Heroes 2. In Company Heroes 1, these were known as strategic points. And there's a big reason for that. The strategic point just indicates you can join up these fuel points lows, the fuel point mediums, and the high points. So you've got low, medium, and high, and you've got the strategic points that link them. This allowed map makers to really think about the value of different areas of the map. The strategic points just gave you pop cap and the ability to cap resources, better resources later on, and join up your territories. And it was obvious as to where the points of advantage were. So, for example, Angerville, which is all about the victory points, and you've got to control even one side of the map, and then you've got to swing to the other side later on. But in the meantime, you've also got to join up your territory, because you could not afford to lose your cutoffs. And these are really distinct, and it's just easier to kind of understand how the map flows, and therefore it's easier for a map designer to design a map. Everything gives resources in Company Heroes 2. A standard territory point gives just under half of one of the resources of the high points, the 7s. There's no low, medium, high. You've either got standard or you've got a 7. Sometimes you get 11s for the munitions, etc. And it's just not as good. It doesn't flow as well. And to be honest, I've actually advised new players it's better to get standard territory points under your belt than rather prioritise rushing for these points on the sides there. They're added bonuses, really, because 2 of these is more better than a high point, and that just screws with the map design, and it doesn't give them as many tools at their disposal. So I think that's a clear win for Company of Heroes 1. And as it was so innovative at the time, I'm going to give it a 5. Company of Heroes 2 isn't as good, so it gets a 3. And that is what I want to talk about for the in-game portion of the game. I think we now want to get onto the menu systems, and this is going to be quite interesting. You're interested in my thoughts on this, especially with like the music's going to come up as well, balance, faction design. I'd love to hear at this point where you think I'm going to go with this in your own minds, and then see what scores I give them. I'd be interested to see what you would give them as well. So any comments in the description will be in the comments obviously are very valued. I'll post this on Reddit and CoH2.org as well, of course, so any comments there, I'll be looking through all of them. Very eager to hear your opinions, and I will be linking to the official thread. So let's have a look at Company of Heroes 1's UI. Very sleek, very 2000s, not 2010s. It's obvious, the campaign, opposing front, Tales of Valor campaigns are on the left, and then multiplayer skirmish, etc. on the right. It's the multiplayer section's tabular, very sleek, very easy to navigate. It's quick. However, it does hide some of the utility. For example, you'd think as a new player that this is where it's at, these custom games, but no. To be honest, it's mostly auto match that you want to be playing if you want to play a ranked ladder game. The ladders are actually part of the game. In Company of Heroes 2, they're not. The ladders are modular. They're added on on a website because they weren't with release. A lot of it's modular, it's not tabular, and it does take a longer time to load. The FPS is a little bit buggy, which isn't great, doesn't help the situation. So you'll notice the flag sped up, then slowed down. My computer's brand new, so it does actually handle it quite well, but I remember my old computer used to have a very slow UI, and that's not good, and that's indicative of the modular state of Company of Heroes 2. It was bolt-ons after release to make it good again. It wasn't good from the get-go, as Company of Heroes 1 was. Bad bits about Company of Heroes 1's UI, as I say, it does hide a few things. If you want to get your added units from the Tales of Valor factions, you have to go to rewards, which doesn't really make too much sense. The replays are in game history, and you have to load game, which is a bit odd. It's not perfect, and CoH2 does actually have better logic to where things are. It says play, learn, additional content. That just makes so much sense. And as you can say, there's pluses and minuses for each. CoH2 was modular, but they did have a lot more to show, and I think they did a damn good job in 2017 of finally getting it in a good situation. So I think I would give each a 3. I'm going to make it a very neutral score there. Social interactivity, though. So we've still got CoH2's UI up. We'll stick with that one. CoH2 does have a lot of social interactivity. There is Twitch. There is the map contests, etc. on the front of the page. However, the chat is rubbish. It's modular. It was added in. It's not as active as CoH1. It doesn't quite work as well as the CoH1 chat, which is to this day more active than CoH2 chat, despite there being a lot less players. So there's a lot more game replays. 59 people right now talking. Obviously, not as I speak, but they're talking. Trust me, they're there. So I do think that CoH1 had better chat. It was more accessible. Social interactivity. It did used to have news posts as well on the front, and of course all the fan sites did have their own chat section. So again, I think both games have decent enough social interactivity. There are lessons to be learned for future. Relative to other games, it isn't very good. I don't think it is as integrated as it could be, but it's not bad. So again, that's pretty tedious kind of draw. You can hear in the background, however, that we do have some music playing. That is the Company of Heroes 1 theme. I'm going to be muting it for now because I'm going to go somewhere with this that I'm pretty sure a lot of you will understand. This is the Company of Heroes 2 theme. It's very dark, mysterious, foreboding, and unmemorable. You know, this music... I'm sure if in 5 years' time I stopped playing this game, even after playing it for so many years, I wouldn't really remember it very well. It doesn't strike me as being overly memorable. Compare that to some of the Company Heroes 1 music. This is the Brits soundtrack. Just having a smashing cup of tea. That's quite funny. I was drinking tea whilst listening to that. But there you go. You've got the Panzer Elite soundtrack here. It says, "We are the Germans. We control Europe." Exactly. It's memorable. I mean, don't get me wrong. CoH2 did improve for the Western Front stuff, but again, it's just very foreboding, very classy. And to be honest, in a World War II game, I don't really want classy. I want memorable. I want songs I can hum on the way to work the next day after playing until 1 o'clock in the morning. So in that regard, I think CoH1 is a definite win, absolute win. And CoH2's music isn't bad, but CoH1 did it better. Balance, though, and this is a juicy aspect. I mean, I wonder where you think I'm going to go with this. But look, it doesn't say balance for two factions. It just says balance. And the balance in Company Heroes 2 is abjectly superior. Now it's 2017 for all 5 factions. I mean, just to exemplify this point, let me get to the GCS, the tournament I ran this year, the faction win percentages. So for Company Heroes 2, look at that. 4 factions are close to 50%. OKW, albeit, was close to 40% at 39%, but that was because of the maps chosen for this tournament and because, you know, most top players play Wehrmacht. OKW were a little bit weaker thanks to a few nerfs just before the tournament. But the balance is ongoing, and the fact that that is the case, that all 5 factions are roughly viable and used in good numbers in the tournament, is very healthy. And there's a lot of win percentages and stuff that are just really good for a game with asymmetric faction design. I think it's impressive. Company of Heroes 1, however, people don't even play Brits and PE in tournaments. Even if they were allowed, people don't play them. I used to run CoH1 tournaments in CoH1's heyday in 2011, kind of 12, when it was just getting ready for CoH2. Everybody started playing CoH1, and people were still playing from the old days, and with big tournaments going on. And people didn't really play Brits and PE. They just weren't very good. The Brits were very cheesy. You can use some abusive strats, but all the best players know how to counter them. Similar to PE, there were strats in CoH1 that just countered them. They weren't well balanced. The vanilla factions are the 2 best balanced factions ever. The famous US versus Wehrmacht balance. But, you know, that's just 2 factions, and the game should be seen as the sum of its parts. And if 2 other factions are completely not used at the top level, and it's really difficult to get a win as them as at the top level, it's not a well-balanced game. So I do think CoH1 has, of course, the famous balance of the vanilla factions, but I think Brits and P let it down. And I think CoH2, as it's an ongoing project, and they're putting a lot of work with the community, I'm going to give it a tentative 4. Because they also say they're going to improve 3v3 and 4v4 balance, which if they do that, that's really impressive. Faction design. I've already spoken about Brits in PE. What went wrong there? The Brits and PE encouraged blobbing. You had stuff like shared zeal. You had the lieutenant and the captain giving these kind of auras of ability, your infantry walked slowly unless they were with a lieutenant in Coming Heroes 1, and that's just crazy talk. Why was that the case? It just encouraged negative behaviour in a game built around cover and flanking and support weapon play, and it was kind of counterintuitive for the design of the overall game with Brits and PE. PE were a little bit less bad, did encourage a lot of blobbing. They were interesting though. But as I say, the design of the OF factions, I mean, let's have a look at the Tales of Valor units. I think that'll really exemplify my point here. The Tales of Valor units just were a bit silly. The Staghound, the Kangaroo character, the Kangaroo car, etc. The balance of them was horrific. It damaged the game at certain points. It was unplayable. We will get onto that a bit later, but they were part of faction design in my opinion because they made it worse. So I would like to say that I think that CoH2 would be a clear winner if it wasn't for OKW. I think OKW were only made good thanks to the hard work of the community, with work with the developers at the time. I think the original developer concepts weren't very good for OKW. It was going to be entirely truck-based army, everything about the trucks, and I think that would have been crazy. Don't want to go. I think it was probably NDAs regarding how it was originally intended, but yeah, it wasn't great. So I will give a tentative win for Company of Heroes 2 there. Company of Heroes 1 has the best factions in US and Wehrmacht, but Company of Heroes 2 has better 5-faction balanced design. So again, we can replicate what it says above there, and that's 2 very important points. They did work better with the community to make all 5 factions work, so it did work out in my opinion. Abilities. Now, what I mean by abilities is the commander selection. What I mean by this is when you're in a game, you get the ability to choose a commander or choose a doctrine in Company of Heroes 1 or 2. And one game did it better and one game did it worse. And whilst the game's loading, I'm just going to move on to another point, which is, it comes hand in hand with this, and that is DLC model. Now, you may think you know where I'm going with this. I was very, very vocal when CoH2 came out about day one pay-to-win DLC. For those that don't know, at the time under THQ, where the community was promised that no commanders or no abilities would affect. There would no be commanders that would. We didn't even know what commanders were. There'd be no abilities or nothing that could be bought that would affect the gameplay. Okay, and that was just not the case. Not the case at all. It affected gameplay pretty horrifically. There was, things like Elite Troops Doctrine with the Tiger Ace. Elite Troops, you could bring on Vets 1 Grenadiers, and then you had a tank that was practically invincible and all-powerful at the cost of all further resources, albeit, yes, but it was game-breaking and just created massive win spikes for Wehrmacht. Soviets at the time also had Soviet Industry, which allowed you to have a 4-minute T-34-76. These 2 commanders were pay to play and therefore pay to win because they were so overpowered, and it was so sad to see Relic doing this. So happy they patched it out of the game. But as I said, I was going to go on to the Tales of Valor abilities, and I am. The Tales of Valor abilities, the Kangaroo Carrier, the Staghound, these things were so obliteratingly overpowered, they practically ruined the game in 2008 when they came out, or possibly 2009. It just wasn't pretty. For that reason, and for that reason alone, I really can't allow CoH2 to lose on this one, because CoH1 never really fixed these things. The Kangaroo did get nerfed into oblivion, but the Staghound still has a bugged 50 cal. And, they never learnt from their mistakes, however. In fact, they made it worse with the commanders. And they lost a lot of traction from hardcore RTS competitive people. I know that for a fact because I was in a clan of StarCraft players at the time. And none of them bought CoH2 as a result of the pay-to-win DLC. So, DLC model, both of them get a 2. No doubt they only get a 2 because they actually kept the game going and give revenue to a small company in Relic. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Abilities, though, we're going to jump back up one. What I mean by this is CoH1 had 3 well-designed abilities for each faction. It was obvious what you were dealing with. Infantry, that's manpower-orientated. That's artillery. You've got Airborne, which is about special abilities and strafing, and the Sky helping you out, being your friend in need. An Armour Company, which is all about the tanks. And that was just obvious. In CoH2, it's never that obvious. I think I've loaded into a replay by accident, but the commanders were a little bit underwhelming. You had a choice of 3 going into a battle. And yeah, okay, I like the idea of 3, but so many of them were useless. And in top level play anyway, people tended to use the same ones all the time, or do tend to use the same ones. So it doesn't actually promote that much variety. And the overall design and the coherence of Company Heroes 1 is superior in that regard. It just helps the game be balanced better. And, you know, it's never gotten stale. So the variety aspects of CoH2 really don't apply. If it was continued to be balanced, I'm under no aspersions that CoH1 would be better in that regard. So I'm more than ready to give my ratings for that one. For the abilities, as I like to call them, CoH1 gets a clear 5. And CoH2 does add a lot of variety. Isn't that bad. I'm going to give that a 4. So it was a win for CoH1, but CoH2 isn't that bad and does offer a lot of variety. It was more balance, and the DLC model that failed for that, but they both failed in that regard. Thematics and character. The whole aspect of Company of Heroes 1, we're playing Company of Heroes 1 right now, is we are Airborne Company. We are Band of Brothers. We've just landed, or our friends, the Infantry Company, have just landed on the Normandy beaches. We've got a sniper on our base. But the whole idea is you're part of a company of heroes. It makes sense. It's beautiful. You got to push the Germans out of Europe, and it made so much sense. Company of Heroes 2, you're a penal battalion getting forced to fight. It doesn't really work. It's odd. It's kind of, why is it company of Russians killing other Russians? It was a small portion of World War II, a negative side of things, much like something like the Holocaust or something similar. You don't focus on that in a computer game. You focus on the heroics. You focus on the glorious Russians rising up against the Nazi invaders, push them out of Mother Russia. You don't talk about Stalin killing people. It's just not what happens. Why would you base Company of Heroes sequel on that? The thematics and character of Company of Heroes 1 are so superior, and the voice acting and everything comes together to create this game that has such a nice aura about it. CoH2 is a little bit more fragmented. It doesn't have a clear vision. Relative to CoH1, it didn't do the Eastern Front well. Therefore, from the get-go, it just falls on its arse. And therefore, from thematics and character, you have to give a big win to CoH1. And this is where CoH2 really fell down in my mind. There was no clear character or theme that worked. Campaign. My voice just broke. I've been speaking for a long time. The campaign of CoH1 was a knockout of the park. I think I've got the ratings to show you from Metacritic for this game, which I've always been talked about because obviously Relic are trying to, get over some recent little bit of dodgy ratings. But the original great rating here was 93%. I think it was 94 when I first looked at it when the game came out. It's a cracking rating. The user score also, everybody loved this game at the time, and it's got great reviews. CoH2, only 80, which was, in my opinion at the time, favourable relative to how it came out. I think it was probably a 75 at best. User score was deplorable. It used to be less than 1 due to the Russian fan base uprising against how they depicted the Eastern Front. And I think that goes to show you the campaign, because most reviewers review the campaign. And Company of Heroes 2's campaign was based on poor thematics. It had some novel concepts, but it had nothing on CoH1's campaign. But with campaign, you have to bring in Ardennes Assault, which was a great turnaround and some great innovation by Relic Entertainment. So, due to that, I would like to say that CoH1, great campaign, a 5. CoH2, you'd think I'd give it a 2 or a 3. I'm going to give it, a 1 or a 2, but I'm going to give it a 3 because Ardennes Assault did save it. Albeit, obviously, with the bugs recently, but we don't count the bugs because I'm sure they'll get fixed. Modability. Where do you start with modability? I think one decent place to start, if you were to go into my Steam account right now, I could literally load up for you Company of Heroes 1 Eastern Front, and it is just fantastic. The modability of Company of Heroes 1 is about full conversions, and And the idea that you could just completely, play a different game based on a game you love from passionate community members, completely renovating something and taking all the assets, stripping them, making new ones, making new music, new voice acting, completely new assets and a new theme for a game is astounding, and we just don't have that in Company of Heroes 2 because they never released full mod tools. I don't know why they never did that. It was, I think, limitations probably. I don't see any reason they wouldn't want to do that. They do support the modding scene, but they never released the full modding tools, and as a result, we're stuck with some great mods in Wikinger and Spearhead, but these things are nothing compared to where we've come from with, I've already said Eastern Front, but Modern Combat mod, the First World War, the Great War mod rather, these mods, Blitzkrieg, these mods were fundamentally superior to anything CoH2's ever been able to offer because the modders have had one arm tied behind their back at all times. They've not been able to prolong the IP for Relic on their behalf because they haven't been given the tools they need. And I'm sure in the future they will be, because I think CoH2's had significant limitations on the developer side of things. So in future, hopefully that wouldn't be the case. Modability CoH1 5 and CoH2, I think they supported it after the fact, so they do rescue it from being a 1. We haven't had a 1 given yet. I'm going to give a 2 because they were restricted and they've tried their best. Broadcastability. So this is the casting UI for Company of Heroes 2. You've seen it a lot, and it is amazing. Big thanks to people like Funk for working with Relic to create this interface, and it's helped the whole situation with casting so much. It's so wonderful. Company of Heroes 1 is, by comparison, very clunky. It uses the game's interface. There is no casting overlay. Also, there is no OBS mode, and for a year within Company of Heroes 1's release, there was a year where they couldn't even take off Fog of War. So you can see here that there's an icon that takes off Fog of War. That didn't exist with Company of Heroes 1 for a single year, which is crazy to think about. So all the game replays tournament activity at the time was all, I'll watch allies and you watch the Axis, and that's how that worked. So the broadcastability is off the charts, the Company of Heroes 2 compared to Company of Heroes 1. Relative to these two games, not relative to something like StarCraft or Dota, but relative to these two games, you've got to give not that way around, hang on. CoH1 would get, I had so many great hours casting it, and in CoH2 would get a 5. But there really isn't much that helps CoH1 be a broadcastable game. There is a replay function, but it just isn't great. Now, release date. This is where we think about where these two games were at when they first came out, relative to the years they came out. 2006, the RTSs that were on the market at the time were all based on stuff like Rise of Nations and Command and Conquer spin-offs and stuff. And Company of Heroes came around and just literally took a baton to their heads and bludgeoned them to death. And it was amazing when it came out. It gets a clear 5. Company of Heroes 2 came out under significant pressure due to THQ going bump and Sega making an acquisition, and they're never able to do this. But even though we've said that for a lot of other carriers, we have to now say that the release of Company of Heroes 2 was a poor state, and a game should not be released in that state with features missing. It wasn't long before CoH2 came out that they actually had the UI was barely functional. They were rushing to complete things. To be honest, they possibly should have asked for a lot more time off their publisher if they could have granted it. And it was not released in a good state. And a lot of their design concepts weren't even that good for the game that they had. You know, the breaking of the ice and the blizzards, that was nice, cold tech, but wasn't great for competitive play. So yeah, that's that. I think that's the only one I can give on this overall, because that kind of mitigates all the other scores I've given to CoH2. I would have given lower, but it's come a long way since then. Now, entry level. This is an interesting one. What I'm saying here is you're a new player. You want to get good at this game. How do you go about doing that? And I'm somebody that's, I've played Wow, we find Eastern Front's loaded now. So this is kind of this is basically Company of Heroes 1. So this does work for what I want to show it to work for. So let's play Soviets versus Ost here. This is what I was talking about earlier as a full conversion. Although I did pick Angerville, I should have picked one of the Eastern Front maps. But you're a new player, you want to learn how to play the games. There is a tutorial, but that's about it. There's not as much dev support at the time as to how to play this game. And a lot of the abilities, whilst deep, were hidden away. You were forced to go to gamereplays.org and find the guides that would help you play the game. All the strategy guides and stuff, the game info, etc. It was all there, but it wasn't actually inherent to the game, and there was a lot of abilities and such that was so tricky to pick up. You were just left kind of learning off other players. There was no OBS mode. If it wasn't for GameReplays.org, this game never would have become even slightly competitive at the time. They literally held the game on in their back with regards to making it competitive, in my opinion. Relic did a great job of making a fantastic kind of an anthemic game that had great aesthetics and had great appeal, but the community made it competitive. And Company of Heroes 2 does a much better job. The community managers, namely Kyle and a few others, have done interesting work, kind of trying to make it more accessible and have guides and have a website that has information on that is valuable. They have produced infographics that, although sometimes wrong, have been an attempt to make it better as an entry-level game. And I think that the tooltips are more helpful in CoH2 and everything. So entry-level, CoH1, 2, and I think CoH2 is still a really hard game to pick up. I'm going to say a 3. Now, skill ceiling, it just flips that all around on its head. Because CoH1 has this depth, it has stuff like armor for infantry, it has a lot of facets that you don't have in CoH2. It has a deep kind of veterancy system that varies across the factions and adds to the asymmetry, but not in an imbalanced way. It creates such compelling matches that to this day, without a balance patch since 2011, people are still hosting tournaments for Company of Heroes 1. If CoH2 stopped being balance patched now, I'm not so sure. That is in part thanks to the skill ceiling of seeing these top level players play and the design and mechanics inherent to US versus Wehrmacht. So I'm going to give that a flip. I'm going to say that CoH1 is a 4 and CoH2, whilst deep, it's got a lot of variety, it's not quite as good. So that's that then. I've now ranked everything for both of these glorious games, and they are glorious games. Both of them are fantastic. I think it's time to give the results out. So let's hover down here, and there's a sum formula underneath, and there you go. CoH1 is a clear victor with 72 out of 100 as the result there. And that is fair. Company of Heroes 2 is a great game. It's come a long way. But Company of Heroes 1 to this day is a better game for a few reasons. And there are features and character that make it a better game. And notably, it was the thematics, the character, and the overall inherent design of the base game that makes it a stronger entry into the series. And to this day, it holds up better. So thank you for watching. Please add your comments and your opinions in the section below and on Reddit and CoH2.org. And look forward to speaking to you. Thank you.